If I had $1 for every time I heard some news about a new King Conan movie in the works, I would be eating Pop-Tarts for dinner. But that's how it has been, and almost 4 decades down the line, there has been nothing concrete to show for, and it is certainly not for the lack of trying. However, the King Conan lore has never stopped in the pages of comic books, and some of the stories have been so interesting that I wondered what was stopping the studios from adapting them. For instance, there is this 4-issue Dark Horse miniseries titled King Conan: Wolves Beyond the Border that expands one of Robert E. Howard's last Conan-related tales into a full-blown adventure about an older, battle-scarred Conan called back into the wild by a cursed relic and a looming Pictish invasion. Not only does the comic series stay true to Howard's lore, it also brings in another barbarian hero of Robert E. Howard, Kull. I strongly believe that the story deserves to be made into a movie, and I think you would agree once I tell you all about the narrative in this video. First things first, let me sort out the timeline for you in case you are straight out of the 80s madness featuring a young, enthusiastic Conan. The events of the miniseries take place many years later, and the story opens with glimpses of an older King Conan who is worn down by the years on the throne. He is bored of the monotony of his life in court, and he is hungry for action more than politics. In search of some entertainment and adventure, he sneaks out of the royal citadel incognito, and he moves through the rough taverns and hostelries of Tarantia seeking out trouble. He is only accompanied by a couple of trusted soldiers as he picks fights and tests himself with drink and brawls because he clearly misses the thrill of his younger days. There is even a fun little incident at the tavern where he identifies a man falsely claiming to be a great soldier and he beats him to a pulp after catching his lie. However, everything changes when he comes to interact with an old frontier ranger named Galt. This man came seeking out Conan, and the old king was quick to identify him as a fellow soldier. Galt is not exactly in the best shape, and he has been living and fighting beyond the Thunder River for years in the green hell of the Pictish wilderness, and he is treated to a good meal before he reveals his true purpose. He explains over a few drinks that he has come seeking out Conan because Aquilonia is in danger from the Picts, who are preparing for a large invasion unlike the usual border raids. Now, for those who don't know about the Picts, they are inhabitants of the Pictish wilderness during the Hyborian Age as created by Robert E. Howard. They are a conflation of the historical Picts and American Indians, particularly the Algonquins, and they are generally known for their frequent raiding parties. Basically, they are treated as savages, and as the king, Conan is not exactly an ally to them. Coming back to the story, Galt continues as Conan listens, and we get a quick flashback story of a time when Galt was stationed as a ranger with a small squad near Fort Quanyara, near the village of Shondara on the frontier. Here he uncovered a conspiracy between several Pictish tribes and treacherous Aquilonian noble Valerian. He even secretly observed a jungle ceremony where Valerian and a Pict shaman performed sacrifices and invoked dark forces in a hidden camp, which probably indicates some kind of a supernatural alliance between Hyborian treachery and Pictish sorcery. During this ritual, Valerian received an ancient iron crown tied to a pre-cataclysmic age of Volusia that was said to be connected to the iconic King Kull and his Pictish ally Brule. Galt later managed to get his hands on the crown, but since then, his life has been nothing short of a nightmare because he is constantly haunted by dreams of shadows in the trees and wolfish spirits stalking him at night. There is also a constant urge in his mind to go back toward the Pictish lands, and he is almost half broken by the time he finally meets Conan. He knows he cannot handle the relic any longer, and he begs King Conan to take up the task that he could not finish, which is to return the crown to its rightful Pictish owners deep beyond the Thunder River. Galt believes that if the crown remains in the wrong hands, there will be a deadly Pictish uprising, and Conan is further intrigued by the mention of a powerful witch named Quarada, whose influence ties into the tribes that are now gathering for war. He then hands over the Iron Crown to Conan, and almost immediately the old king feels the pull of the relic. He senses an irrational compulsion to ride west into the wilderness and settle the unfinished business, and he soon leaves the comfort of his court in Quilonia and heads out with a small entourage of his most loyal soldiers. The official excuse is that he is heading out for a low-profile inspection of the border, but the reality is completely different and far more dangerous. The artwork of this comic series is so pristine that all these scenes come to life, and I wonder what a good director with the right budget and vision could do while translating it all to a movie. Conan insists that they cross the Thunder River and push deep into the Pictish wilderness instead of staying on the Aquilonian side, despite his men's obvious fear of the Green Hell. The jungle is depicted as dense, humid, and hostile, filled with constant drum beats and animal cries, and the narrative stresses that this is no place for civilized soldiers. This makes Conan feel more alive than any throne room ever did. As they ride and hack through undergrowth, the crown exerts a subtle influence, tugging Conan's instincts toward a specific direction, like a supernatural compass tied to Pictish magic. They encounter signs of Pictish movement that are unusual. Multiple tribal marks, totems, and abandoned camps that point to different clans converging under a single military purpose instead of feuding with each other. Conan realizes that Galt's stories of tribal unification were not exaggerations. The Picts are truly banding together for something bigger than a raid. At the same time, a sense of doom hangs over his small party. His knights are brave, but this is enemy territory, where the terrain itself favors the Picts. Soon, the group is ambushed among the trees by Pictish warriors who use the environment perfectly, attacking from foliage and shadows with arrows, spears, and sudden charges. Conan fights ferociously, cutting down several attackers in brutal close-quarters scenes, but there are too many enemies and too little cover. One by one, his knights fall in bloody, uncompromising fashion that underlines how unforgiving this world is. Dying violently in the jungle is presented as a likely end for anyone who follows Conan. Eventually, Conan is overwhelmed, disarmed, and taken prisoner. The captions emphasize that the undercover king has finally found the danger he craved, but at a dire cost. He is bound and marched through the wilderness, all while assessing his captors and noticing that their war paint and totems bear the mark of the Wolf Clan and others, confirming that several tribes have indeed rallied under a single war leadership. The Picts discuss him like a prize, debating whether to sacrifice him or use him as a hostage, unaware or uncaring that he is king of Aquilonia. The narrative then escalates the scope. Conan learns that the tribes have coalesced behind a war chief named Brune and a witch named Quarata, and that they are forging an alliance wide enough to threaten Aquilonia's frontier fortresses en masse. There is also mention of a rival faction within the Picts, the Wolf Clan led by War Chief Brill, whose exact allegiance is unclear and who might either reinforce the invasion or resist it. As Conan is dragged deeper into the forest, he realizes he is now right in the middle of a power struggle and a religious tribal movement built around the crown he carries. I love how the story sets up Conan's capture, which seems absolute, but the approach or impending involvement of Brill and his Wolf Clan hints they will not be straightforward allies or enemies. The tension of Conan's captivity quickly pivots into rescue and shifting allegiances. Conan, still determined and unbroken despite being beaten and bound, awaits sacrifice or execution as the Picts prepare rites connected to the crown and their war campaign. He calculates escape options, counting enemies and scanning for weaknesses, even as the noose tightens. Before the ceremony can be completed, a violent interruption crashes into the scene. Picts of the Wolf Clan, led by War Chief Brill, attack the camp. Brill's Wolf Clan is presented as a renegade or splinter faction, with its own agenda that doesn't fully align with Quarata and the Unified Tribal War Council. In the confusion of fighting between different Pict factions, Conan fights his way loose and encounters a figure from his past, Nai, a Pictish witch and former lover from his earlier adventures, who leads the renegade Picts opposing Quarata's plan. Conan and Nai share a charged reunion, and she is both ally and a living reminder of how often Conan's past returns to complicate his present. Well, we all have to deal with complicated exes sometimes, don't we? Nai explains that Quarata, along with her champion Croth and the war chief Brune, plans to use the Iron Crown as a rallying symbol to bind all the tribes under one war banner for a grand invasion over the border. The crown is not just a relic, but something that carries mythic authority and a connection to ancient Pictish destiny, making it the perfect object to unify scattered tribes. If Quarata controls it, she controls the narrative of Pictish history and future war. Nye and the Wolf Clan, however, believe that Quarada's methods, including human sacrifice and trafficking with monstrous forces, will doom the Picts and unleash horrors that threaten everyone, Pict and Aquilonian culture alike. Conan decides to join forces with Nye and Brill's Wolf Clan, agreeing to help stop Quarada's scheme rather than simply escape back to Aquilonia, because he recognizes that only decisive action now can prevent a far worse war later. He also understands that the crown must be restored to a Pictish lineage that will treat it responsibly, not used as a tool of mass bloodshed. This alliance puts him in the strange position of fighting alongside Picts against other Picts, challenging his old prejudices and the long history of barbarian versus barbarian hatred between Cimmerians and Picts. I just find the whole political touch to the story very interesting, and it definitely makes for a more favorable reading for the adults who can appreciate the depth in the plot. Conan, Nye, and Brill track the movements of Brune and Croth and seek out the source of the crown's deeper power, which is the Cave of Uav Dagon, a name that hints at something far older and darker than tribal politics. Along the way, they move through dangerous jungle terrain, harried by hostile beasts and haunted by the sense that the land itself responds to the crown's presence. There are hints of giant worm-like creatures and unnatural disturbances underground. The atmosphere grows more mythic and horror-tinged, and I almost get a Lovecraftian vibe here. Their path leads them to the mouth of Uav Dagon, a cavern whose depths are linked to pre-human or pre-Pictish entities, and they realize that Brune has gone ahead with the crown, intent on sealing his claim and his power there. The issue ends with Conan and his allies entering or approaching the cave, aware that something monstrous stirs within and that Quarada's overall plan may involve not just uniting tribes, but binding eldritch forces to the Pictish cause. The closing pages set up a final confrontation in the darkness below, where both the crown's true nature and the fate of Brune, Brill, and the Pictish future will be decided, and I love how it all adds to the thrill of the fourth and final issue. For the final showdown, we dive straight into the heart of the supernatural threat inside the Cave of Uav Dagon. I still remember how my skin crawled when Conan, Brill, and their pursuing group confront the disgusting and dangerous worm creatures. Conan and Brill press deeper and track the trail of Brune, and I loved the creative touch when they use a large rock as an improvised weapon or barrier to keep the creatures away. During this underground struggle, Brill chooses to sacrifice himself so that Conan and Brune can escape, holding off the worm creatures and effectively trading his life for the chance that the Wolf Clan and the larger Pictish people might have a better future. His death hits hard, because Brill has been the face of a more honorable, pragmatic Pictish leadership, and his choice underscores the theme that even long-standing enemies, like Picts and Aquilonians, can produce heroes whose values mirror Conan's own. Conan and Brune burst free of the cave and are met by Nye and a gathered force of Wolf Clan warriors, who rain arrows and witchcraft-backed attacks down on the worms, while Nye uses a spell to banish or drive them back into the depths. With the immediate horror of the worms contained and the crown now in play among the living again, the story transitions to a full meeting of all the Pictish tribes, a grand council where war and leadership will be decided in public. Quarada appears before the assembled clans, dramatically displaying the Iron Crown in her possession, using its presence to solidify her authority and to push for united war against Aquilonia. Nye steps forward and publicly accuses Quarada of treachery and orchestrating sacrifices, trafficking with monstrous forces like the worms, and manipulating the crown's mythology for selfish power rather than true tribal good. Quarada is struck down by a storm of arrows, killed in a hail of Pictish shafts that symbolically reject her twisted leadership and purge her from the Picts' future. At the same time, Conan confronts and kills Croth, Quarada's champion, in a direct one-on-one fight that allows him to demonstrate that even as an aging king, he is still a terrifying warrior, capable of cutting down the strongest fighters of the tribes. With Quarada and Croth dead, the war faction loses its central pillars, and the question becomes, who will carry the crown and what direction the Picts will choose? Conan takes the Iron Crown and hands it to Brune, who has survived the cave ordeal, effectively offering him the symbolic mantle of leadership. but Brune instead passes it to Nye, acknowledging he still must prove himself worthy. Nye accepts the crown as a caretaker, representing a more balanced, less fanatical Pictish path, one that honors their traditions and their gods without surrendering to apocalyptic destruction or endless war. She then asks Conan for a concrete price that he, as king of Aquilonia, create a truce with the Picts, opening a path to lasting peace along the border rather than the endless cycle of raids and reprisals that have defined their history. Conan agrees, recognizing both the strategic benefit to his kingdom and the moral weight of what he has witnessed. If only the world leaders could ever come to such an agreement. The narrative then jumps forward in its final pages to show the long-term legacy of the crown, where it eventually comes to rest on the brow of Bronn mac Morn, the legendary king of the Picts in the era when they stand against Rome, tying this story into the broader Robert E. Howard mythos. The miniseries closes with an image of that future king and a sense that Conan's actions echo down the ages through the fate of the Pictish people and the iron crown they carry. I don't know about you, but I call this one hell of a story, and I was totally mesmerized once I was done reading. So as you can see here, the story has everything that you might hope for in a proper Conan movie adaptation. I love the idea of an older, wiser, and kingly Conan whose restlessness and weariness adds a lot of emotional depth. Suddenly, it is no longer about the brutish barbarian smash that we are used to. Also, if you are someone familiar with the works of Robert E. Howard, you will like reading through more of the Picts and Aquilonian frontier, which are central but underused parts of the Conan lore. Another aspect of the comic series that has me convinced about its cinematic potential is how it blends political intrigue and frontier horror with a mythic quest filled with adventures. The fast-paced narrative will translate into nail-biting sequences, and the best part about the comic series is that even someone who has no knowledge of Conan can enjoy the story. If you are looking to get introduced to this world of magic and sorcery, this might be a great start, because this miniseries works as a gateway into both the King Conan comics and Robert E. Howard's original Frontier stories. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this miniseries and the chances of this getting adapted into a movie. Also, share your take on the right cast for such a film if it ever gets made.